Welcome to the session, the top 5 most critical digital risks and their impact. My name is Mario Bozilov, and I'm the founder and lead instructor at MBS Academy. We are a training company focused on delivering digital skills training for business/non-technical professionals. So today, I would like to talk about digital risks. This is my personal area of expertise. I worked in risk audit and data analytics since 1994, for quite a long time. And I just would like to share some of my research on the topic in the last few years. Digital risk is becoming more and more of a concern for all of us, simply because as a result of COVID-19, especially, we did have an increased use of digital technology, and we'll be relying more and more on it in the future. The increased use and the acceptance by everyday people, not just people working in the enterprise, but customers, vendors, and so on, brings with it a few new challenges that organizations need to be aware of. So today, we'll be talking about 5 of those risks, who at the moment are considered one of the top 5 most critical ones. The first one is the risk of data privacy breaches. And according to a report from the Ponemon Institute, the average cost of data breach globally is expected to reach $4.25 million in 2022. And this is an increase of close to 10% from 2020, when the cost was 3.86 million. So as you can see, data privacy breaches can have a very serious impact on the profitability of an organization. Also, the average number of records lost or stolen in data breaches is expected to increase from 25,500 to 29,000.7 in 2022. And this creates a number of concerns for situations, and also a number of concerns for us as customers. I must admit that these days I'm really uneasy, to put it mildly, when I have to share my personal details. Things like address, phone number, date of birth is a big no-no for me, unless it's some sort of a private, government or financial organization. I'm very unlikely to share my date of birth, because it's one of those pieces of information which can be used quite easily for synthetic identity fraud. So these are all things that we need to be considerate of as customers. And this is what the organizations are facing when a data privacy breach occurs. So the first is loss of customer trust. Now, if we feel that our personal information is not safe with the company, we're much less likely to do business with it. And some companies require a certain amount of personal information to be provided to them, if we are aware of a data breach with that specific company, I don't think that we'll be willing to do it, and this will lead directly to loss of business. Also, the other concern is how the company will use the personal information. Sometimes I'm willing to share my information, and I know that the company will use it for marketing purposes. However, these are very rare situations for me personally. In most of the cases, I'm not willing to share my personal information, because I don't want it to be sold to a number of third parties that I don't have control over. So when we have a situation of data privacy breaches and the company is not protecting my data, the company is not taking care of who it's sharing the data with, this is definitely eroding my confidence in that company and my trust. Financial damage is an important one because, number one, an organization can be sued for negligence by customers. Okay. Now, number two, there is also a cost to notify individuals whose information was exposed. Now, in Australia, most of the privacy legislation actually has a requirement for the company where the breach occurred to notify the customers. In Australia specifically, there is also a time limit on it. So within, I forgot the exact time, but it was very short, about 2 weeks. So within 2 weeks, the company needs to notify the customers and it needs to notify the regulator. This is all a cost to the company, and it also will erode its profitability. The other thing is the fines by regulators, and various regulators around the world have got a different view, and some are not as strict as others. But one of the things to keep in mind, and this is the legislation, the privacy legislation in Europe, GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, it is very draconian actually, because an organization where a privacy breach occurred can be fined 20 million euros or 4% of the turnover, whichever is greater. And this legislation, although it's a European one, applies around the world because it applies not to European companies, it applies to companies that hold data of European citizens. So, for example, someone like Petronas in Malaysia, they do have a number of European expats working for them. They would fall under GDPR. Companies like that. So if your organization has got data of European citizens, you fall under GDPR. GDPR is the strictest, but not the only one. So fines by regulators are something that the companies need to keep in mind. And of course, reputational damage is the other one. So even if the information is not compromised, we will trust the company less as consumers if we know that that a data privacy breach occurred in that company. Because this time the information wasn't compromised, but next time we cannot be so sure. And if the controls didn't work once, then we can expect that potentially the same thing can happen again. And that directly may result in customers taking their business elsewhere. Now, if our organization is in a position where nobody else provides that product or service, that's one thing. However, if we are competing in a commoditized industry, that means that we can very easily lose business. The second risk is that of cyber attacks. Now, Juniper Research estimates that there will be 20 billion cyber attacks in 2022. Now, a similar figure comes from Gartner, where they are saying that there will be 26 billion cyber attacks, excuse me, in 2025. Both numbers are quite close, and we know that cyber attacks have been on an increase for quite some time. This is not something new. I'm very heavily involved with an organization for IT security governance and assurance professionals called ISACA, ISACA. Some of you may have heard of ISACA. This is the professional organization for IT auditors and security professionals. We have been talking about these things for quite some time within ISACA and within the professional circles. However, things have got really boost in the last 2 or 3 years, because the cyber criminals are becoming more proficient, so they can actually execute attacks much better. The increased use of technology also contributes to that. So we can expect that that the cyber attacks will keep rising overall. And here is what the World Economic Forum says in relation to the cyber attack, the top 5 cyber attacks. Phishing is number 1. That is becoming, the criminals are becoming very professional in relation to that. So criminals pose as legitimate organizations, and they try to trick people to provide some information, or whether it's personal or whether it's a company information, by setting up fake websites or clicking on malicious links or attachments. Now, I must say that the phishing emails that I see, not very often, because Google and Microsoft and other providers are starting to actually get on top of that, but still, nevertheless, some of them go through. Some of the phishing emails are really good, and unless you pay close attention, you can be very easily fooled that this email comes from a legitimate source. A new one, actually, it's a variation of phishing, is using the phone. And actually, I do get SMS messages or WhatsApp messages, not very often yet, but I do get them once or twice a week, asking me to do something or telling me that something will happen if I don't click on whatever link. I know that if I do, my phone can be infected with malware. So I usually don't, and my personal view is that, and personal advice to people who, when I talk to, it's better actually not to do something than to click on a malicious link, which will result in the phone being infected. Now, the thing is that quite often we can wait, we can actually ring the provider and speak to them and solve the situation if we're not completely certain. Ransomware is another type of cyber attack. Basically, it is a type of software that locks the hard disk of the victim, and all of the files are gone. And you cannot recover them unless you pay a ransom to the attackers. Now, some organizations do pay the ransom, some organizations decide not to. It's up to the organization. The general advice is don't do it, because even if you pay the money, you don't know whether your files will be decrypted. Now, we're talking here about organizations like, let's say, hospitals. It happened to a hospital in the States 3 or 4 years ago. All of their patient data was encrypted, and they had to pay in order to get the data decrypted. I forgot what happened, whether they paid or not. There was also a local government council that also had their data locked. Now, one of these 2 organizations paid, the other one didn't pay. The advice basically is do not pay, but have backup so that you can restore anything on any of the data. I have a friend who used to be the CIO, Chief Information Officer, of a large company here in Brisbane, and he said we have been hacked so many times that now our backup and restore processes are top-notch. We get infected by malware, and we automatically kick off the restore, so there is no impact on the organization. Malware, this is short for malicious software. It is used, and this is a term that's used to describe any software that can harm a computer or its user. It does include viruses, worms, trojans, spyware, which collects information like keystrokes and similar information and sends it to an attacker. Spear phishing is actually a form of phishing in which an individual or organizations are targeted. Now, phishing basically works on the principle of spray and pray. So the attackers send a lot of emails and hope that 0.1% of the people will click on the link. Spear phishing is totally opposite. Actually, the emails are crafted because they are targeted at a specific individual or an organization, but even within the organization, it's still there's a specific individual or 2 or 3 individuals that the attacker is trying to reach. Now, so they actually try to find as much information as possible about the victim so that their emails look much more believable, and then they have a much higher probability of success. The thing is that the person they are targeting usually is a high value target. So when they manage to breach their accounts, or when they manage to breach the organization, then the payoff, the financial payoff, because most of these things have to do with money, the financial results for the attackers can be quite rewarding, unfortunately. SQL injection is another type where it's used in web forms when you're entering information on the web. And it's possible, that goes very technical, but it's possible for an attacker who knows SQL. SQL is a type of language used to extract information from databases, to type some SQL statements after the field that they enter. So for example, if there is a field called first name, they can type their first name, like for example, it can be Mario, and then they can type the SQL statement after them. And some systems where the configuration is missing, or they haven't been updated, or the configuration hasn't been done well, or there haven't been any recent update, some systems will take that information from the field, from the web form, and actually execute the statement. As a result, the statement may say, send me the passwords of everybody in the organization, or send me the first, last names and email addresses and the personal address of every employee of the organization, or every customer. So it does require a little bit of expertise, but not much. Basically, a computer science student in year 2 and 3 can very easily does have the skills to execute an SQL injection attack. So it's something that organizations need to be aware of. Social engineering is another type of attack. Again, according to the Ponemon Institute, it's $15 million is the average cost of social engineering attack this year. And there have been 4.2 billion social engineering attacks in 2022. So this is an increase of 30% from 2021. By the way, social engineering is one of the preferred methods for attackers because it does not it requires less effort, less technology. It requires a certain type of skill, but attackers usually do not try brute force attacks like penetrating firewalls and that type of stuff, because social engineering allows them to achieve much better results with a lot less effort. So this is something to keep in mind. Phishing, which is a type of social engineering when an attacker pretends that they are someone that they are not, accounts for 70% for all of these attacks. So basically, in the social engineer is using direct human interaction and trying to trick people into breaking the normal security procedures that exist within a company. So some examples. So they might say, okay, I work for this company, but I forgot my ID card. Can you please let me in? Because I need to pick up my lunch. I'm on lunch break or something like that. Most social engineers are actually quite skilled psychologists, so they would know who to ask. They don't go to ask everybody. They know who to ask, and actually, when they get access to sensitive information or to facilities, then they can continue with their whatever they are trying to do. So the other thing is creating a social sense of false sense of urgency, and getting someone to take an action so that they're not thinking it through. It's basically, okay, I want to go in somewhere, and if I want to get access to a facility, I can say, I see a person getting out. Say, oh, listen, you need to get me in because there is an attack on our computer network that has happened. I work for the IT infrastructure team. Don't have my card with it. I just got notified about the attack now. I was on my lunch break. Could you please let me so that I can start working on fixing it? And quite a few people will fall for them. As I said, social engineers are pretty skilled. I was reading a case with a person who actually went. He was hired. He was a white hat hacker, a good one. He was hired by a company to do some penetration testing, so penetration testing and also testing the overall security environment. He went to a party, he spoke to a guy who turns out to be the CFO, Chief Financial Officer of the company, who told him that he is going on holidays the week after the party to the Bahamas. Okay, cool. Next week, the social engineer went to that person's PA and said, listen, John told me before he left for Bahamas, so he is dropping information, so the PA will think that he knows John. John told me before going on holidays that I need to do so and so. Could you please let me in his office so that I can pick up on that? Now, quite often, a person may fall for that because the PA may be thinking, okay, yeah, or he knows that John's on holidays. Obviously, he knows the person. She doesn't know that he only met him last week. He knows the person. Yeah, okay, I'll probably give him the information, the file that he needs, or I'll let him in John's office. So this is very common. The other approach is to use flattery on other forms of manipulation. Unfortunately, humans fall for flattery quite easily. We all have that problem, according to research from Harvard. And the more flattery, the better. So once people start trusting the social engineer, they will be more willing to provide information that they normally wouldn't. So social engineering takes a little bit of time, but overall, it can be quite effective for a criminal. But insider threats, another one to keep in mind. So National Insider Threat Task Force has got the following statistics. For the states, 8,000 insider threats in 2022 so far. The type of insider threats, so 4,300 confirmed cases of malicious insiders. The second one, however, is much more worrying because there are 3,740 cases of negligence. So basically, people who have access to information or access to computers or access to facilities, they just do it, they just make mistakes. We all make mistakes. So nobody is basically can say that they're not going to ever make a mistake. So in these cases, we need to be aware of negligence. How can we fix that? The easiest way is actually to train people, to make people aware that problems do exist and they need to be mindful, because people think that cyber risks or digital risks are something which is out there and it doesn't apply to them. That's not the case. Digital risks are concerning every organization in the world, small, medium, or big. So we just need to be mindful that our negligence can lead to some pretty serious consequences. And negligence sometimes includes even things like shredding sensitive paper reports that have been printed, or not sending something to a printer and leaving it there to stay for 24 hours before we pick it up. And this is some sort of a document or a report of an extremely sensitive nature, because anybody can come to the printer, see it, and just take a photo of the report. They're not going to remove it. They can just take a photo and then do something with it. So we need to keep making people aware that negligence is a big problem, and they need to be careful. So Symantec's Internet Security Threat Report, they are saying Symantec is one of the top cybersecurity vendors. They are saying that 28% of the organization that they surveyed experienced an insider threat in 2020. And those organizations had an average of 3 attacks, each one. Also, 18% of organizations had a former employee account compromised in 2020. Now, this is a very worrying statistic because former employee accounts should be totally disabled. There should be a process in a large organization like a bank or government department. There needs to be a link between security and HR. And in most places there is. So when a person leaves the organization, HR are the first ones to know, but that information needs to be provided to the security and to the IT infrastructure people. When I say provide it, I don't mean provide it manually. Actually, it needs to be there needs to be some sort of an automated process, because if we talk about an organization with 40,000 people, like a large bank, it's impossible to keep track of all of the people who are leaving manually and provide that information. That needs to be automated. But former employee accounts should not be active in any way. They should be totally disabled and not accessible at all, except by a system administrator, network administrator. The other thing is that 25% of the organizations had a current employee account compromised. Now, how that happened is a different thing, but negligence plays a role. Now, and most organizations actually enforce things like, let's say, screensaver limits. So if you get off your desk, your system will lock in 5 minutes or in 3 minutes. On my phone, I have a 30-second limit. My phone locks after 30 seconds. On my laptop, I have a 3-minute limit. Desktops are different. I have a slightly higher limit, 10 minutes. But the thing is that when the system is up and running and everybody can access it, and the person went to fill their water bottle and they have been absent for 2 or 3 minutes, it's enough for a criminal to actually get access, even put a quick spyware on that system and then just move on. So insider threats, as the name implies, comes from inside the organization. So that includes malicious insiders, employees that deliberately steal data in order to sell it or sabotage systems. Negligence, employees who basically expose data through poor security. Now, a lot of organizations enforce types of passwords, but there is a reason why the top password, the top most popular password in the world at the moment is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and number 2 is the word password. Is a password. So this is a negligence. Yes, I know it's easy to remember these things, but it's also easy for anybody else to guess them. So here are some examples. An employee steals data and sells it to a competitor. Sending things to the wrong email address. It has happened to all of us, I guess, at some point in time. We just need to be really careful. A couple of times I did hit the send button. A few times I actually managed not to hit it because I noticed that I'm sending it to the wrong person. So all of these things, but we need to work and explain that to everybody, because I come from an audit and risk background. I do think about these things all the time. Most people don't. Actually, I was running a course in Dubai 3 years ago, and one of the attendees there, it was Dubai World Trade Center, one of the attendees was actually quite sincere when he explained, Mario, who thinks about this rubbish? I said, well, listen, there's enough people thinking about this rubbish, trust me. So we actually need to let people know that things can be critical. Contractors or business partners who misuse access, this is related to policies, this is related to our purchasing and hiring processes. We need to vet contractors or business partners, and actually we need to decide which parts of the organizational systems and organizational data they are allowed to use or to access. The last one that I want to talk is about the third-party risks. Here are some of the top risks in 2022. In 2022, according to Forrester Research, supplier risks, contractor risks, IT service provider risks, business partner risks, and outsourcing risks. So when you put your payroll system or your finance system in the cloud, as the term goes, which is becoming very popular for a good reason, cloud infrastructure provides a lot of business benefits. We need to be really careful. Who are we trusting with? Who is the provider? Who is the cloud provider that we're putting the system that supports a key business process like payroll or purchasing or sales? Now, if we are a tier one organization, we should be putting our infrastructure, our cloud infrastructure with a tier one provider, not with a tier two or tier three provider just to achieve some cost savings. It's too risky. Now, if we're a smaller company, we cannot afford tier one provider, then we may need to think about some other options. But the reality is that most of the tier one providers do have various options, and some of them are also suitable for small businesses. These providers include Microsoft, Google, Amazon Web Services. So even if you are a small to medium enterprise, still consider going for some of the top providers. These are some of the specific risks of third parties, continuity. So the outsourcing provider can go out of business. And if they do, how do we get access, number one, to the information that we've stored with them? And number two, how do we actually continue and what do we do with that process? So if we outsource our payroll, for example, what do we do? How do we keep paying people? We need to have something in place. Now, other things, number 6 here, intellectual property. So when we store data with a provider, we can just use the storing documents, not specifically like using a system like payroll or finance, but let's say if we store documents and all of our storage infrastructure is sitting with a third party, who owns the intellectual property? Because actually some of the terms and conditions and some of the contractual clauses are actually quite damaging, because in certain cases the provider owns the IP. So we want to know all of these things. Okay, delivery risk is another one. So an outsourcing provider may not be able to deliver the services that they promised to us. So if we put our purchasing process there and the provider cannot process the invoices that come from vendors, or if they promised 95% accuracy and they're only achieving 70% accuracy and they're making wrong payments left, right, and center, what do we do as an organization? We need to have that into account, and we need to have some measures in place. Employee risk is another thing. Okay, so if we send our data somewhere in another country, can we trust the employees of that provider? We want to know, okay, what is the process for them hiring and vetting the employees, because we're actually putting personal data there. We're putting our own data, the data of the customers, the data of our employees. So these are the things to consider when looking at that. We are a little bit over time, so this is the end of my presentation. We do run various training programs. Please connect with us on LinkedIn. You all came here through LinkedIn, but also these are our contact details. You will receive the presentation shortly. And in 2 weeks' time, we are running a training session on the foundations of auditing digital risk. If that is something which is of interest to you, please consider it. You will also receive some information on that one. I'll just have a look if there are any questions. Okay, there's a question from Michael. Do you see an emerging market for security companies for screening employees and certifying companies? I'm not sure, to be honest, because the big providers definitely handle that well, but I think that the tier 2 providers probably will consider something like that, because I don't think that they'll have the expertise in-house to screen the employees. So yeah, it just depended which level of the market.